Hello everybody, thanks for joining and welcome to our webinar about business analysis. I'm Anthony Biondi, Sales Director at Censhare, and I will be your host. If you suspect or have identified any inefficiencies within your marketing department, today we're going to walk you through the do's and don'ts that should be considered before you embark on any implementation, how to find them, how to address them, and how to communicate and work with those internally. Joining me to bring some insight and expertise to this topic is Sean Kenny, Business Analysis from Columbus, Rob Watson, Advisor at Columbus, and Matt Simpson, Solution Consultant at Censhare. Afternoon, gents.
Afternoon.
So, gents, talking about business analysis, we're going to address the who, the what, the why, and the deliverables as a consequence of all of that. But first port of call is, what is business analysis? What does it mean, and how would you contextualize it?
So for me, business analysis is about understanding the needs of the business, where there are opportunities for improvement, where there are pain points, and then helping to understand how you might address those needs. And in one sense, and we'll talk about technology today, it's about a technology or an IT implementation. But in many ways, it's also about people and about the business context that we're talking to.
So considering that there are multiple different people involved, different processes to consider, different technologies to consider, what are the typical processes that you would undertake as a business analyst working with a potential client to help them visualize and contextualize what Rob just introduced you on?
So I think there's sort of a top end of business analysis and a more bottom end when you get into working towards implementation. So at the top end is much more, Rob, where you're working with the strategic areas, really looking at businesses and getting those requirements. When you come to what I'm doing is then, okay, now we know where the business wants to go, how do we get there? And when it comes to something like a process, we of course have a lot of tools, things like on-site workshops where we go really dig deep into what exists today, what the future state they want to be in. And part of my job is to get those concrete business requirements into the developers so that we're then working towards an implementation and then all the follow-up bits afterwards as well.
Okay, and as part of this conversation, in a little bit more detail later on, we'll talk about some of the specifics some of the questions we ask, some of the conversations we go into, some of the people that we talk to. But at a very high level, what are the types of people that you would engage with from a business perspective when going through a business analysis? Are we talking to technical people? Are we talking to end users? Are we talking to senior executives? Is it a combination of all of those? Can you give our audience a little bit of insight as to who might be part of that process from their perspective and why that's important?
Yeah, so I can take this to start with. Typically, I'm about how we align the initiatives that might come from a strategic engagement with company strategy, the business strategy, a digital strategy if one exists. From a starting point, we need to understand what strategic direction that an organisation is taking, and often that comes from speaking to some senior stakeholders in the leadership team. Obviously varies a bit by the size of the organisation that we're speaking to, but quite often it will be a CMO or CDO or CEO to gain the understanding of what the overall organisation company strategy is, so that everything that we recommend and work on in terms of the initiatives lines back up with the overall company strategy. Then a big part of what we do is bring together disparate parts of the organisation to really, I guess it's a start of change management, really to work with stakeholders across different parts, different business units, different business lines perhaps, to understand how that overall company strategy relates to what they do in their product areas and their markets and the different areas where they work. It's often starting from a direction provided by senior leadership, but then we commonly speak to different stakeholders across different parts of the organisation to understand how that relates to them and also what their particular needs are. Because, as an example, if we're working with one business line, for example, that's selling one product area, And then in a large organisation, it's often different product areas across they each have their own unique needs. And the way that they are delivering against the company strategy varies. So we're trying to get behind that and understand how making changes can help all of those different areas to move forward.
So for me, what was key and interesting about everything that you just said there was at no point did you really talk about technology. At no point are you really talking about anything that is ultimately going to deliver the outcomes as a consequence of this analysis. What you're talking about there is better understanding the business, its direction, the strategic input that's going to have on the ground floor as well as at the top floor. Ultimately, what we're talking about today, right, is gathering that information to then enable you to make the right decisions from a technology standpoint. And whether you've already got the technology in your stack that can help you achieve that, or whether you need to underpin it with other things. So I think the key message there, correct me if I'm wrong, is really understand where you're trying to go as a business and how that's going to impact the business to then enable the decision from a technology perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's important to remember that business analysis is only as effective as the information we have.
Right.
And so, as Rob was saying, that goes from the top down to the bottom. The more information we have, the better recommendations we can give into the direction you should be going.
Yep.
And I think there's also some very interesting sort of intangible benefits about getting as many people involved in a project as possible, and this is where we maybe go into things like project momentum. I think we've all seen projects that sort of wither and die, or there's not quite enough push to get things out the door. So the more engagement there is from the client side, often the more impactful these transformation projects are.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. I think when we talk about business analysis, often we talk about a formal process with a beginning and an end. And actually, I think it begins from the first contact with an organisation. So as you're saying, Sean, that momentum that can build, it begins from the first interaction. And as much as we talk about a formal business analysis process, really what we're doing from the very first contact with a customer is getting to know them, understand the organisation, and build those rapports, that momentum that we really need to make for a successful project.
Actually, what we're talking about here, as we've already articulated, is business process and business strategy and the impacts of all of those things. Mm-hmm. What guidance, what advice, considering what we're talking about here is in its most simplistic sense, understanding what business analysis is, what advice would you give when organisations are thinking about the technology first before they're understanding this part of it? Would you encourage them to go down that road, or would you actually encourage them to maybe have a foot in both camps?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because, of course, we talk to people that have some knowledge or interest in Censhare from the beginning. So it's tempting to be led directly to the solution. Yep. But I think embarking on a business analysis process will ensure that those decisions are correct. The momentum we talk about, the success that we want to get from a project, they begin from a neutral standing point.
Rob, anything to add?
Yeah, I think ultimately what I see quite a lot is that when you start with the solution and you haven't really considered the challenges that you're trying to overcome in a business, those are projects that businesses have trouble getting started with, because when they're before the C-suite and for approval, or there's a PMO that has to approve the start of a significant transformation project, then it's quite difficult to be able to talk about what it's going to be able to deliver to the business if you can't really describe how it lines up to the overall business strategy. So whilst solution first thinking occurs all the time, and often it's because the people that are putting it forward already know what the answer is, and that's good. It's quite difficult to get those projects started.
Absolutely. It happens really often. We'll speak with someone that will say, I've worked with Censhare before, we did this, and that's fantastic, but the temptation is to be overly led by a solution. And the important question, as you guys I'm sure are asking on a consistent basis, is, but why? Why do you want to do that? What are you hoping to achieve? And actually rolling back a little bit can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, and I think the risk as well comes there that you end up replacing like for like. You're just taking out the old system, putting in a new one. Maybe there's some additional functionality you wanted, but rather than going back to where you want to be as a business and what technology will help us get there, which is, I think, what most companies actually want.
Anyway. Yeah.
And as a final point on this first segment, which is, again, just as a reminder to understand the what of a business analysis and what that consists of, and considering what we've just been talking about technology, have you got any examples or any thought process, any of you, that will speak to somebody saying, we need to do this, we need to address this problem, and then through the business analysis, actually identifying that that isn't the biggest problem. Actually, what you understood to be holding you back was stopping you understanding the real thing that's holding you back over here. Does that make sense? And have you got some examples of where you've helped an organisation identify what the real problem is versus what they thought the real problem was?
I mean, 100%, yeah. I think quite often we are brought in to solve some challenge in terms of that the functionality of a software solution can resolve. But along the way, we hear about lack of agility or operational challenges and those kind of things. It can be that those things all line up to the original hypothesis that a particular software solution is the saviour and will help to deliver it. But it also can mean that it isn't necessarily about deploying technology. It can be about business readiness, appropriate resourcing to teams. It can be about the operating model that's being used. So it isn't our objective to always prove to the challenge that we've been brought in for. It's our prerogative to help organisations to move forward and to solve the challenges they've got and grow against their company objectives. So, yeah, it really is pretty common that by working across teams that don't commonly talk to each other, we can see common patterns to do with those kind of more operational issues or more operating issues that we can address. So yeah, it probably happens more often than it doesn't.
More often than it doesn't.
I think it's nice to embark on that kind of process with confidence that you're not going to look under a rock and find something that you really have to shy away from. I think when you've got a range of technology, a range of experience, that you've got a nice full tool set, you can confidently embark on a business analysis knowing that, okay, I'm not going to turn over something here that is going to kill this project for me. I'm going to find out more, I'm going to understand more, and I'm going to end up with a better implementation as a result.
So to summarise all of that, it's a window into the business strategy, the business functions and operations, and then painting a picture as to how existing technology, new technology can potentially increase and improve your efficiencies associated to all of that in its most simplistic sense.
100%. And hopefully ensuring you don't make a very expensive mistake.
So we spoke about the what and introduced the specifics of business analysis. We want to talk about the why now. Want to give some insight as to the specifics as to why you would embark on this. And what some of the benefits of doing it would be. But I kind of want to split it out into two whys. I want to talk about it from a strategic perspective, but I also want to talk about it from a project perspective and how the whys of that can help you understand what road you go down. So, Rob, if we start with the strategic element, why is it important that an organisation consider a business analysis process before really investing in any technology or any changes internally? What are some of the key things that would help them understand the why?
Yeah, I mean, so I touched on this a little bit during the what, because I think it's critical that we start with why, and why would you do anything that's an investment for the business and potentially a huge distraction from the core sort of commercial aspects of driving a business. From where I get involved, it's usually about understanding the outcomes that you want to deliver through any kind of initiative or program of projects, and it's about trying to create an understanding that people buy into across the organisation. It's really easy to express, really easy for anyone, if asked, to say what is it that you're trying to achieve to. And then if you can create a vision and a number of outcomes that take you towards that vision, then once you're a year or 2 years or something like that into a transformation program, everyone still understands why they originally embarked on it. Why did they go through these often quite disruptive but also career transformative activities? So if everyone can align around something like, we want to reduce our marketing spend by 10%, or we want to be able to roll out a marketing campaign in 2 weeks, not a month, or those kind of really big, those kind of big but sometimes not closely defined outcomes, then that's an easy way for people to align around, buy in, and give their time to an initiative. Other sort of super important thing, I think it varies by organisation, is that there is alignment to overall company direction. So often, I think that initiatives are driven by, it worked well somewhere, so let's do the same again, roll, repeat, and create a benefit. But actually the context is different. So what works in one place doesn't work in another because the product's different, or because the customer's completely different, or the business model's different. So creating an alignment and understanding with what it is that you're trying to deliver versus what everyone else in the organisation is trying to deliver lines everyone up, gets everyone in the same direction, so that everyone can move at the same time to go and achieve the really big objectives.
Can you give some insight into why it might be good to have some impartiality associated to that? So not necessarily just using an external consultant to do this with you, but have that impartial voice and insight into the business. Why would that be important to an organisation like that?
I think that neutrality, that fresh perspective is a really important part of this. So means that you're not conditioned by, we've always done it this way, is always a phrase that we'll hear a lot. And I think making sure that you've then got that external validation to a degree, that knowledge that you've embarked on something again in a neutral way, that you've looked at it from outside, from inside, really every aspect of the business, to set that totem down, just to build on what Rob was saying. Having that totem that guides you. If you're going off course and things are maybe, taking a long time, or day-to-day operations are being affected, having that underarching goal, I think, is going to be really, really important. So, yeah.
So, Sean, with that in mind, and to plug Columbus a little bit and your expertise across multiple different verticals of doing this, if you're an organisation in a manufacturing vertical, for example, having that impartiality from their perspective with bringing you on board is going to be beneficial, because you can bring to the party what other organisations similar to them have done in similar situations, whether that be the size of their business, whether that be how they operate, whether that be what vertical they sit in. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we would absolutely bring, benchmarkable projects. We've done this many times in collaboration with Censhare, so we know what the steps that you need to go through from a generic bit, not, as you were saying, Matt, this isn't a rigid process. This is adaptable for every business. But there are certain paths you should be following to get to the outcome that's needed. And I think going a bit back then, even to what Rob was saying about the strategic part, there's quite an interesting example where, let's say you wanted to make your marketing material, and you have a very sort of niche goal that is, we need to have some kind of rights management involved. This is important if you're working with marketing material, and Censhare is a great way to do rights management. But if you had done a proper business analysis first, you might even go back to a point where you're saying, no, we need to step away from printed material. We need to move into digital, and we can leverage CRM data to target this marketing material in digital channels. We can use AI translation to have headings specified for these target profiles. And again, you wouldn't be able to do this. This isn't just a technology or a system. This is going back to then all the people involved. Is the business ready to be working in a digital sense that, yes, maybe print is important, but digital is now much more important. So I think without going back and doing the strategic part, you're going way too far down into the path that this is what we need, and you're a system implementing firm. Yeah. Can you please do this? Yeah. So I think that the value you really get from a company like Columbus is to business analysis properly.
Okay. Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you made a really nice point, Sean, in terms of working with Columbus and Censhare means that if we talk about an external consultant process, whatever it happens to be, we might mean external from the organisation, but actually if we're from Censhare's point of view speaking with the business, it's really validating to have external input beyond just Censhare as well. So that's why working with Columbus has been successful for us in the past, because it means that everybody can validate where they need to be. The partnership is a very big benefit of that, I would say.
So, Rob, another thing that we want to talk about with regards to the why is the strategic element of this and building out that picture. So can you talk about some of the specifics that you would focus on from a strategic perspective?
Yeah, so assume that we've got a good alignment with the organisation and what the organisation's trying to achieve overall, then we will look at what the output needs to be from any given process that's going on, what those outputs are and how they align to the strategic outcomes. And then through service blueprinting and other tools, we will look at what the front end perspective needs to be on a process, and then what the underlying back end processes are.
Can you give an example? Give an example.
Yeah, so it could be that we've got a piece of marketing material that needs to cross a number of different departments and a number of different employees before it can be produced. It could be that there's an author, it could be there's an editor, and then there's someone who needs to sign off on that copy, and then someone who needs to be involved in publishing it. By looking at the different individuals that need to be involved, looking at where any bottlenecks or dependencies are, then we're able to identify inefficiencies and strip back the time that needs to be that needs to be afforded in order to be able to deliver the outcomes.
Okay, and later we'll talk, when we touch on the deliverables, I'd like to dive into those inefficiencies in a little bit more detail and understand those. But Sean, from a project perspective, so what Rob's talking about there is strategically aligning the project to fit with the business needs. But from a project perspective, implementing or configuring or amending or adding to your technology stack is not a 5-minute job. It can be quite a complex process. Why is some of the reasons that embarking on this business analysis, enabling you to better understand that, important from a project delivery perspective?
I mean, a lot comes back to budget, of course. Being upfront about what is this going to take resource-wise to get what we want is a big part of why we do it, but it's not the only reason, of course. There's a lot linked into then, the more we understand upfront, the smoother it goes through implementation.
Yep.
So the risk, of course, that the more uncertainty you take into an implementation project, the more hours you burn developing into sort of pathways not that you don't want to, but you might realize later on are maybe not the direction we should have been going. And I think, Matt, you were talking about, you start turning over stones, and the further you go down, the more you find you don't like. So the idea is that you want to turn those stones over as early as possible so that you can plan for them, prioritize, and then make sure you're at least aware of the pitfalls about when you're going into implementation, but also the path you want to take. And the recommendations coming from the consultants are ease or allow you to make the right decisions sooner.
So as a final piece of summarization, there's a couple of things to consider here. There's the strategic side of things, everything you spoke about, Rob, understanding the journey that the business can take, utilizing another piece of technology, for example. Sean, you spoke about the ability to implement things and putting a detailed project plan to enable you to manage that efficiently. And then what you spoke about there, Matt, was enabling any vendor that comes to that party to better prepare and enable the outcomes that Rob spoke about from a strategic perspective.
So I think there's also another bit that comes before this, which is about a value lens. And at Columbus, that's so baked into what we do that sometimes we don't talk about it enough. What we look for as part of a strategic engagement are a way to sequence initiatives into those things that drive the most amount of value with the least amount of effort, put in first, and then chunk down a whole transformation into value incremental segments.
Doing more for less.
But, I mean, who doesn't want to do that? So there
Yep.
it isn't that we ever come up against a client or a transformation where everything, there's a huge amount of pre-work before you even start. what we always look for is a way to break it down into manageable chunks with step-off points that allow that transformation to stop, but to have achieved value with every increment.
And I think that that sort of philosophy aligns very nicely with both Censhare and sort of the wider Entirely offering, where you're aiming to get an MVP in front of clients as soon as possible, tangible benefits as early in the project, and then we can begin to evolve piece by piece.
So in this section, what I want to do is create some tangible examples for our listeners. So almost a day in the life of how you engage from a strategic perspective, from a project and technology perspective, and what that might look like from a customer's viewpoint. So starting with you, Rob, can you talk about a day in the life? You walking into an organization for the first time, how do you typically approach it? Who do you typically approach? How often are you on site versus off site? Some of the key elements that a prospect should consider as part of this particular process from when you get involved.
Sure, yeah. So at the start of a strategy engagement, the thing that I'm most interested to find out are the levers and mechanics behind the organisation. I think that every organisation has its own culture, it has its different mechanics and operations, and I'm trying to understand how that organisation works. And we do that through a process of interviewing with senior stakeholders, and then those senior stakeholders are usually nominated from the person who's driving the engagement with us, so that we've been given an appreciation of how it is you work today. But ultimately, that isn't driving a whole load of value to our client, because it's just about disseminating information into us so that we can get it into our minds. The next point is about what it is that's going to move them forward. And again, we ask questions that are in some ways the same to different organisations, but in some ways reactive to what we already know. So it could be that we cover over things like what markets that they operate in, what different product offerings that they offer, what different business models that they work against. And from a generic sense, that's quite common, because those are the big things that you can look at changing and influencing in any business. But then when it comes to understanding the nuances in a particular vertical, then we need to ask questions, because where we can bring generality and we can bring market trends, what we need to bring from a client are the specifics of that particular organisation, where they feel that they're strong and where they feel that they're weak. So we ask questions to disseminate that and create a business canvas.
I think it's important also to give our listeners a bit of insight as to what that means from their time perspective, because I think sometimes, in my experience, engaging with people speaking about this, it's, well, how long is this going to take me? I have a day job, etc., etc. So in advance of all of those things, talk us through the communication, the agenda that is set, and typically how long these interviews would take, and the specifics around those.
We try to do as much pre-work as possible. We ask for read ahead on any of the company strategy information. We read news that's publicly available about companies that we work with, so that we've got an idea of what's in the public domain, so that we can go into those conversations on an informed basis. And I think that because things like company strategy are typically baked into the minds of the people that we speak to, it doesn't take a long time to get into the bits that we really need to hear. And I think workshops can be between an hour and hour and a half, and anything more than that doesn't yield a huge amount more in terms of the direction that we're getting. It is useful for us to speak to different people in the organisation. Sometimes we hear the same thing from different parts, but sometimes we don't. And that alignment's really important, because then we understand how much what we're asking about has a consistent consensus across the organisation, and how much of it is not, because that significantly affects the outcome. And when we make recommendations about what aspects will make a transformation successful, then we're looking for alignment across senior stakeholders around what they want to achieve.
So I recognise this next question is how long is a piece of string? But from the moment you walk into an organisation to the moment you deliver a document that is the business case for change, and I recognise it's going to be variant on different organisations and their requirements, but typically, are we talking years? Are we talking weeks? Are we talking months? On average, what does this look like?
I think totally depends on the size of the organisation. But to give you a low end and high end, then in a really sort of medium-sized organisation that still derives value from this kind of process, then we might be talking about 2 to 3 weeks. But quite often we are around 7 to 8 weeks of engagement. And then in super complex global organisations, then we might be getting into 12 weeks, 3 months of engagement that allows us to look at the process. I think another point is that there are different resolutions that we can look at strategy. So we can, and we quite often do, take quite a high level perspective when we first start working with an organisation, because from one perspective, that's what we're being asked for, to gain an overall understanding of where the opportunities are. And that allows us to see what areas need more deep dive. And by taking that approach, then we don't need to repeat on understanding an organisation every time we look at a particular initiative. But then when we're in a more specific engagement, let's say where we've already identified that marketing efficiency is an area that an organisation sees an opportunity and can improve, then we can go straight into that with a laser focus and reduce the scope of what we're asking into those things that are likely to provide improvement in that area.
Okay, so effectively, whether you know the specifics of what it is that you're looking to address, operational efficiencies, or whether that you just recognise there's a lack of understanding, there's different ways that we can approach this. There's not one size fits all.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a reason we often get selected, is that we're able to bring a framework, which we've done many times, but that framework adapts well to the specific needs of an organisation, the specific size of an organisation, the number of business lines, units, maybe organisation from an international perspective. There's lots of different factors that affect that.
So, Matt, Sean, the elephant in the room here is that there's probably going to be technology at the end of this. Mm-hmm. From your perspective and from a project perspective, what's the day in the life in that context for you and working with the customers and building out the technology understanding and project associated to that, either with existing stack or potentially new systems?
Well, I think Sean made a brilliant point earlier in terms of delivering something tangible as soon as possible, but that can count in the pre-sales process where I'm typically involved more commonly.
Yep.
That could just be something as basic as a custom demonstration. So we could build out the flexibility of the platform to illustrate how we can incorporate content into the system somehow, to experiment with a couple of the modules, whether it be Censhare or with MarMind or Lane or Facelift. And it means that we can show something. We're really lucky that we've got a very wide range of tools. We've got a wide range of expertise with Columbus, and it means that we can start exploring things as quickly as possible. So really, the day in the life would mean looking at something as soon as we possibly can.
So what we're talking about there is, as a consequence of what Rob has done, giving them context and a view into what that might look like in reality through a piece of technology. Absolutely.
Something to touch, to feel, to work with as soon as possible, maybe even before Rob and the team have started speaking with the organisation. We might have a small look at something very early in the process to then use that as a tool for the more formal business analysis process. So it might even be a precursor.
And Sean, from a deliverable perspective, IT, project managers, business heads, potentially end users, from a training, user acceptance testing perspective, all of those things need to be considered as a deliverable. How do you work with an organisation off the back of what Rob has done, off the back of what Matt has just spoken about, to paint that picture and give them insight into what that might look like? Who do you speak to? How do you engage? So on and so forth.
Yeah, so generally at the start of where I would come in, there's some understanding of what the business needs, where they want to go, and it could be pre-system selection, it could be looking for a recommendation on which direction to go. So usually the first port of call is on-site workshops, which would be, as you said, very technology-driven, looking at what exists today, current state, future desired state, definitely end-user interviews as well. So I think what Rob was talking about is high level, a lot of senior leadership. Now we start to get to sort of, okay, now let's see how this will impact the organization. So we really need input from the whole spectrum. And as we said before, I think in the first section, as much input as we can get, then the recommendations will be only improved. So then we try and come away and do sort of our business analysis, put together a report based on what we've learned. Again, this is the first start of someone in my role understanding your business. And I think it's important to remember that my role will continue through implementation into rollout. And another immeasurable part of this is how much do you trust this person? Because they are your representative out in the implementation partner. So they are the one that's going to be driving your agenda in the project towards the developers, for example. So I think that the trust element is really critical to start building from day one. And usually I have a very good counterpart on the client side as well, which, we kind of work as a team and come together because, as we went into before, it's not just the sort of development and the system itself. There's the people side, which comes, of course, from the client.
Yep.
So then off the back of that report, that's usually very recommendation heavy. There's nothing set in stone yet, but this is where we really start getting to, okay, what's our roadmap? Where are we going? What do we need to do to get there? And then would come building up a backlog, which is, you can imagine the gap from we need to reduce our marketing production lead time by 50% to here's 2,000 development tickets assigned with acceptance criteria is quite big. So that's really what we're doing. We're sort of distilling that into actionable development areas that can be done. And then, of course, throughout development, we're there checking that everything's going according to plan, working through with the client, and then all the way into the end, which is, of course, training and rollout, which, if you want to go into the same question as Rob, how long does this take?
No, I wasn't going to ask you that
okay.
because that's really putting you on the spot.
Thanks.
But I guess, so there's two phases to what you're talking about there. The first phase is very much at the front end of the project, painting a picture as to what it might look like. And then you're also there beyond that point to deliver on all of that and support all of that. So this continuity is the important, I think that's the key word here. From the moment you as the customer have identified this is what you want to do through to what is delivered, there's a continuity with your team being involved across both phases.
Yeah, and we've absolutely seen the benefits of that red thread, that you have someone who you know what they know because you've given them the information, of course, and you've interacted with them many times a week for the past X months. But also, again, as we said, that you trust them. You know if you ask them to do this, they will take action on it and take your needs into the project. And I think that's really where the value comes, both from our side as consultants, but also from the client side.
So again, in summary, what we've kind of identified here in its most simplistic sense from a time frame perspective, it's anywhere between a couple of weeks and up to 6 months, give or take, depending on your requirements, the size of your business, what you're trying to achieve at the end of it. In terms of day-to-day activity, it's online, on-site workshops that require senior executives, end users, technical people to bring their knowledge, expertise of their business and their ideas alongside us bringing our impartiality and understanding associated to that ultimately delivers what the next phase will be, other deliverables.
Yeah, quite often we will know the role that we need to work with. So we can say we need to speak to a product owner for MarTech, or we need to speak to a BA in finance or some aspect like that. But we don't know the individual. And it could be that person doesn't have that title. It's common that person doesn't have that title. So we can describe the kind of knowledge that we need to get from someone, and then quite often the client that we're working with will say, you're best to speak to this person, and that helps. That will help us to navigate the organisation, find the right people to speak to, help them to help us, and build out an overall understanding of what we need to do. I think the role of a BA can really make or break a project. So where Sean operates as an advocate for a customer, really understands what they need, really fights for what they need to deliver in terms of outcomes, then they operate as a right-hand man to a product owner in a business. So it really is a hugely important part of success and delivering the outcomes that are needed from transformation.
Yeah, I think the output from that kind of process is fundamental in terms of aligning, when we reach the point of aligning technology with the business analysis process, the output, the consistency, the trust that you guys will have fostered as a result of that will be really important.
So what I want to talk about now is the deliverables. Between the three of you, can you give us an example as to what it looks like when your job is done? What does the customer get, and what typically would be a next step?
Yeah, so from a strategy engagement, then we create a roadmap of initiatives where there's an understanding of the value that those things are going to drive towards a company strategy, and also some of the effort that's required in order to deliver those initiatives. And even working in an agile way, there's usually some need to look forward into the future about what those things are over a number of years, even with an ability to move those initiatives around. But I do think you can't stay away from the intangible benefits, because to create that, and I think it is a process, is that you've engaged across an organisation and you've brought people together who never usually work together. You've created some coherent vision that those people can stand behind, that they can recognise, that they can see, they can hear themselves having spoken to, but then it's boiled up into what they've all said. So you've created all of the momentum that you need to then go into with those coming initiatives. We really think that out of a strategic engagement, it's only a success if it's actionable. So we have to have considered those things that are going to help the client that we're working with to move into some kind of change. It doesn't have to be technology change, but it does need to be something that helps them to move their org forward. So we help to look at things like the return on investment. We help to look at the KPIs and metrics that will help to define success. We help to create those aspects that align back up into a business case that can go into the board or the C-suite or wherever decisions are made in an organisation, to help to see what improvements are going to be made, what problems are going to be solved, and where does that take them from usually a commercial perspective or from an objective perspective. The reason I only hold back on commerciality is that often sustainability, environmental considerations, and other higher purposes are a big part of what we're for us to deliver.
So ultimately, what that would be delivered as a consequence of this is a tangible number at the end of it, potentially, if that's what you're looking for. I.e., if you're looking for operational efficiencies, we can give you a number as to what that's going to look like over a period of time, whether that be terms of cost, whether that be in terms of increasing revenue, whether that be saving costs over that period of time, what it would look like from a sustainability perspective. We can give that type of detail as part of a deliverable here, or not?
We can when we work with finance teams to deliver that. So I think that's an aspect where, in order to look at how improvements deliver against business metrics, then there's quite a lot of financials concerned in that respect. We can certainly help towards the cost of implementation, and we bring those areas. But I think that in most cases, uplift is something where we can bring industry standard metrics. We can say that it's quite usual to see an improvement by a certain degree, but applying that onto a business's own P&L, we work closely with finance teams which are built into a business to apply those numbers and apply those uplifts. But that's why I say that a business case is a collaborative effort, because it requires some of the financials that only a business can own and understand. But that's a positive, because that means that we work alongside FCs and financial analysis and financial analysts and so on. And through that engagement, we can build a relationship with finance teams, and that keeps everyone honest, because it means that when a proposal comes through, it's only going to be underpinned by their own numbers.
Let's be honest here. Some of the things you're talking about there are going to make some people quite uncomfortable, because you're talking about money, you're talking about a return on investment in that context, which in some cases could potentially mean people going through a redundancy or things like that. In my opinion, this is not about making people redundant. This is not about costing people their jobs. It's about increasing efficiency and ensuring that people are enabled and empowered to do the jobs that you actually recruited them to do, rather than firefighting and doing those sorts of things. So when I talk about generating a return on investment, I'm talking about it in that context. Do you agree with that, or is that not part of what we're talking about?
I think I absolutely do agree, yes. I think that when people talk about applying AI, which is often where that topic has come from, into an organisation, it's about either helping people to do their job more efficiently, more effectively, and to a greater degree, which drives competitive advantage, or it's about backfilling resource that never existed in the first place. So if we look at retail, for example, where people have been cut across the board in head office roles and out in retail stores over the previous decades in a broad brush way, then customer service suffers. What we're talking about here is applying process improvement technology and other aspects to put back in and drive forward customer experience to where it should always be. So I think this is really about being competitive, and it's really about being able to deliver good service that differentiates an organisation, or it's about delivering back-end operational excellence in a scalable and effective way that allows an organisation to be effective. Because it's not just about, or it isn't about cutting roles from an organisation. It's about enabling growth, and it's about enabling scalable growth. So a lot of what we talk to organisations about is how can they use their people more efficiently? How can they use them more effectively? How can people be involved in work that drives a difference? How can we...
Alongside technology.
Right, and the two, I think, go completely hand in hand. So it's really about how can they create an efficiency and competitive advantage.
Sean, what we're talking about there is, and most of our listeners would have been involved in or even written business cases themselves. So they're familiar with what a business case consists of, and what Rob is talking about there is building tangibles associated to that regarding strategic business decisions. The word I've got in my head when I think about something that you would deliver as part of that is a statement of work. So effectively creating a document that takes them through the journey of implementation and the stages of that, and a project plan. Is that a good way of summarising it, or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
That's certainly very relevant for the first phase of when we come into implementation, how we would work. So the report off the back of interviews would be maybe more based on recommendations, ways forward, risks. We're talking across 50, 60 pages. But that would be something then to inform the business back what we've learned and the direction we recommend they take. Then we would start looking at building a backlog, briefing the project teams, having a statement of work signed off. And sort of the end point of all of this is a sort of ready-baked project waiting for the green lights. And yes, we start development next Monday, let's go. That's really then getting from here's what we want to do and achieve into now we need to push the button and start our development sprints. And of course, then there's incremental deliverables, we said, all the way through the implementation of the project. Then comes all the phases like training, handover, and I think an interesting one that gets missed out a lot on these sort of deliverables lists is the product itself. And it's if you're new to how this works, having someone in the product owner role early helps, but not essential. But it's the moment when we, as a third party, would hand over the product to be managed internally by the business is such a critical point. And having that role there really underpins that you understand it's important. It needs further development, because it's very rarely a point in time where you say, we're happy with this now, we're gonna keep it as
It's an evolving thing.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that leads into, of course, the next phase where, the initial implementation is done, we've rolled out, now what? And that's what we usually call the evolve phase, which is saying, okay, which direction do you want to go? Now the box is open. Let's look at what the possibilities are. So it's not a sort of static process of this is what we want to do, that box is checked. Because if you hold that, you will see how quickly your competitors get ahead of you. So.
And Matt, from a technology perspective, what deliverables can be achieved as a consequence of this process? And in particular, one of the things I'm thinking about is bespoke demonstrations, proof of concepts, those types of things, where as a consequence of going through all of this, both us, Censhare, and the customer have a much broader understanding, deeper understanding, of what we're trying to achieve, they're trying to achieve. And as a consequence of that, we can turn that into almost reality through bespoke demos, proof of concepts, that type of stuff, right?
I think the clearest thing from a business analysis point of view is that it takes us on a journey from the beginning where we've got this wealth of possibilities. We've got a flexible platform. We've got however many people within an organisation that want to work towards a common goal. We know we've got a broad ecosystem with Censhare entirely, but we have to decide what to do first, how we want to do it. And business analysis takes us on that journey and gives us that starting point. Okay, that's great, but which of our tools are we going to use? Which are we going to do first? And the items that you described there, the examples that you gave, whether it be a custom demonstration, a proof of concept phase, whatever it happens to be, it gives us that pathway to work upon. So I think that's the clearest thing. In terms of a deliverable, we go from the possibilities to reality in terms of what do we need to do to bring this thing to life.
And ultimately, as a summarization for all of that, regardless of how deep from a business and analysis perspective you go in, there's risk, right? These projects are fraught with risk, whether that be from a cost perspective, whether that be from an implementation, user acceptance. There's lots of things that need to be considered, and there's risks associated to that, and things are going to go wrong. That's life, it's reality. I guess what all three of you have described there is being as risk averse as we possibly can. So from your perspective, Rob, what we're talking about as a deliverable is here are the tangible examples as to why this is beneficial to you, and give you, the business, the confidence to invest in that project over there at X cost with a view of what the return on investment might look like in X amount of weeks, months, years. What you're talking about, Sean, is a view into the complexity of the deliverables of that. So what project managers do you need to have in place? What training do you need to have and anticipate for? What does that look like in terms of deliverables from a time frame perspective? And how does that impact existing systems, existing processes, turning things off, turning things on, et cetera, et cetera? And then from your perspective, Matt, I guess the summarization there is, as much as we possibly can, we can actually give you physical insight into what that future looks like through a proof of concept process or a defined demonstration that gives you view as to how your workflows are going to be used, how your integrations are going to be utilized, how your content is going to be accessed from a user's perspective. So is that a fair summarization? Is that ultimately what we're delivering here? A document that removes as much of the risk as possible and gives you as much insight into the future as possible.
Very much so. I think the exploration of risk is a key concept. I think the more exploration early, the lesser the effort of fixing any problems that you uncover at this stage. The sooner the better. And an effective business analysis is essentially that. You're doing it sooner rather than later.
I see a couple of key risks that get overlooked in transformation are we moving fast enough? And often that requires some freedom to go try things at little investment, but huge return in terms of learnings and allow people to deliver things fast. And it talks a bit to the proof of concept idea that Matt spoke about earlier. And the other kind of risk that isn't considered in that way is whether a transformation actually delivers against the outcomes and goals that from a business perspective it's considered to. Sadly, I see so many of these initiatives have turned into a technology replacement project, and that's where I think we bring something different, because we bring our value lens to the process. So every small increment should be value delivery, with an ability to step off and stop if it isn't continuing to deliver value. And that keeps us at Columbus on our toes, because it means that we always look at whether what we're delivering is giving our customers value, because it's only giving our customers value if it's giving the end customer value. So what we align to is creation of value through the full value stream, allowing our customers to always be able to express that value against their company strategy, which allows those kind of bigger transformative initiatives to move really big things that elevate businesses from small to medium to large to enterprise, and those kind of huge movements.
Sean, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think risk is such an interesting topic, and it's not always our role as consultants to mitigate risk. Sometimes it's enough to just highlight it. And I think going into resources and requirements, everyone wants as much as they can for as little as possible, but there is an element of reality here in a project as well. Budgets are limited, resources are limited, time is limited. There's all these limits and all this sort of what you consider negative impacts on a project. So, clarity, communication, scoping, all of this upfront as much as possible are the tools we use as much as we can. But as long as you have a handshake agreement at the end on the path forward, then I think, usually you can find yourself in a good place.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hopefully this has been informative to you. We've walked you through the what a business analysis is, the why you would do it. We've taken you through a bit of a day in the life to give you some insight as to what it might consist of, and giving you some insight as to some of the deliverables and actions as a consequence of investing in anything like this. Please take the time to like and give us your feedback. There should also be a link below that gives you insight into how to reach out to us. But again, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.